going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here with Mike Kaye. Latest episode of the No Huddle Show, the middle of OTA season. I'm fresh off of seeing Aladdin a couple days ago. It was terrible.
Who'd you go with?
That's not important.
So, just like the genie, I'm in the mood to help you, dude, learn a little bit more about OTAs.
That was as bad as the movie.
Hey, okay. Well, we've got a lot of content coming your way, and I think what's interesting about OTAs entering the second week is Carson Wentz and DeSean Jackson, which I think we'll get to later. We've got a lot of stuff brewing now that we've talked to the coordinators for the first time in a while, and I'm going to let you handle the rest.
Yeah, we're gonna try and split these up since we're going to be... there's only a couple more OTA practices we get to see. Then we see all 3 days of... I don't know if we get to watch the practices, but we'll get 3 days of mandatory minicamp where everybody, maybe not Malcolm Jenkins, will be there. We'll find that. That'll be a big storyline. But for the duration of this and maybe into training camp too, I kind of wanted to split it up between what we heard from the press conference at the beginning of before practice, which will happen, what we heard and saw on the field, and then what we heard in the locker room after, because there's a lot of different things to process in all of those. So we'll start with the press conferences. We started with Jim Schwartz. He's always an interesting press conference. Out of the three coaches, he's the most entertaining one, easily.
He knows how to work a room.
Yeah, for sure. Whereas the offensive coordinator maybe doesn't, I would say. But we won't harp on him too much, I guess. But Jim Schwartz...
In fairness, he was actually in a pretty good mood this time.
He was in a good mood, but still interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, but Jim Schwartz. So the highlight of the press conference for me was this quote where doesn't really matter or anything, but his quote about Brandon Graham, where someone was asking him about Brandon Graham not having to play defensive tackle anymore because they have Malik Jackson now, and he was like, someday when I'm old and sitting on a rocking chair somewhere, I'm still gonna remember the moment Brandon Graham strip sacked Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. and that fans loved that he said that. For all the hate that Jim Schwartz gets, they were very happy with that quote.
It was the play that outside of the Philly special, that I think we'll all remember from that game. That was kind of the biggest thing that the defense did by a mile in that game.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
so, of course, Schwartz is going to remember that one. But, yeah, he actually was pretty... he's a guy that says a lot without saying a lot. I actually thought he offered a lot of really good nuggets in this one. Talked about Hassan Ridgeway being a guy that's really stood out since they've acquired him. He talked about Rasul Douglas's new kind of physique. He's been working out. He's not been one to really compliment Rasul openly, and I thought
that was interesting because that was after a question about which guys have stood out in terms of physically transforming themselves, blah blah blah.
Yeah, so
the fact that he said Rasul meant something.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty notable. I liked what he had to say about Sidney Jones. He was actually pretty defensive of Sidney Jones.
Yeah, 'cause he got asked a lot about him.
Asking about his weight and stuff like that. He said he thought that he had the tools to really be a good corner in this league. And then I thought, overall, his assessment of how they would use defensive tackles was really interesting. They've used defensive ends in on third down to pass rush for the last few years, but when he was with Detroit, when he was with Buffalo, they used two legitimate defensive tackles on third down. That's what they'll do here with Malik Jackson and Fletcher Cox and or Timmy Jernigan. So I thought it was interesting that he kind of, took a page out of his history and kind of brought that to the forefront. Hey, this is a misconception. Hey, this we do because of personnel. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
And, so the defensive line, I thought the way he talked about that was interesting because there's I don't know if panic's the right word, but there's maybe an overreaction to the Eagles' defensive end depth chart. I know they've lost Michael Bennett and Chris Long, which is really big. I don't think the group is maybe as necessarily good top to bottom as it was last year. But the way he talked, I both don't think he's concerned about it because he's pretty high on Sharif Miller. I will say I thought it was notable he didn't even mention Josh Sweat. He had many chances to talk about Josh Sweat and he didn't. Nobody asked about him. But I think it says a lot when a coach goes out of the way to mention somebody. And he never mentioned Sweat. But got the little pup just walked in.
Yeah. Miller was directly asked about Miller, but he was pretty long-winded about it, which I thought was interesting. Miller's a guy that, and I talked to Miller after in the locker room, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but Miller's a guy that's kind of a blank canvas for him, and he strikes me as a guy who really likes to take defensive ends and kind of mold them. Josh Sweat's a high upside guy who wasn't really developed. I thought he got more out of Vinny Curry than any defensive coordinator had in a really long time. Derek Barnett, obviously. So, to your point, I think that the Miller love is legitimate. I mean, it was the only defensive draft pick this season.
I think they graded him higher than most teams did, too.
Probably.
That's
not really saying much.
Yeah. So, whether or not defensive end is an issue really just comes down to Derek Barnett, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not just, but they're putting a lot on him this season.
Mm-hmm.
He missed most of last season. Jim Schwartz he raved about him how he played in those first 6 games before he got hurt. He thought he was, I forget what the word he used, but he was really happy with the way he was playing. And I think you and I had talked about in those first 6 weeks on the podcast about how good we thought he was playing before he went down. He's been limited in OTA so far. I think he's only done individual drills. It's not worrisome right now, but they're banking a lot on that guy becoming something, especially with Vinny Curry being the only backup, and Vinny Curry's coming off the worst season of his career. And then Sharif Miller, Josh Sweat, Joe Osman, Deshaun Hall are the only other guys who don't really have much experience collectively between them. So if Derek Barnett, number 1, doesn't stay healthy all year, number 2 doesn't produce like he needs to, then you can really be concerned. I mean, and that's a fair question mark. Like, you can call that a question mark.
I agree with him, and I agree with you. I think the defensive end goes the way Derek Barnett does. If Vinny Curry and Brandon Graham are starting the majority of the season, you're in trouble. I mean, they're both over 30. Both aren't really known for finishing at the quarterback. They're known for getting pressure, but they're not really, sack guys. I think that could be a concern, especially when you have guys that are going to command double teams in the middle, like with Fletcher Cox, Malik Jackson. He did bring up that Malik Jackson has kind of a defensive end like body, which kind of is interesting because I think you're going to get opportunities to do kind of like a jumbo line set where you go Malik Jackson on the strong side end, Brandon Graham in the weak side end, and then you have Timmy Jernigan and Fletcher Cox inside. I think
it's like the big group of dudes.
So they'll have a jumbo package. They're probably going to have a speed package. There's going to be stuff where, based on situations, they're going to be able to use Malik Jackson at defensive end. That's why I don't think they're as concerned. I think the defensive tackle depth is significantly better than it was last year. Another thing that I thought was interesting from the press conference, he was asked about Paul Warlow, and he said, this is a direct quote, "First thing he has done is impressed every single person in the building with his work ethic. He's just been incredible the way he's attacked his injury rehab. He's really been a leader for a lot of other guys. We have a significant number of injuries in there, and he really has set a good standard for the work that it takes to recover." That's kind of interesting. I mean, I think that's why you re-sign a guy when he's coming off a completely lost season.
They clearly are high on him, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's got a good shot at a roster spot, and I think they like his leadership. Maybe he's takes on more of a special teams role, and Camus takes on more of a defensive role, and then he becomes that special teams captain. But Warlow's a guy that got some guaranteed money in his 1-year contract, and so I think he's a guy that we need to keep an eye on, even though he was not at OTA practice.
Yeah, I was going to say he didn't practice
on Tuesday.
And not unclear why, but he did tear his ACL on the first day of OTA. It would be nice if we could talk to him because it's kind of interesting because he's a guy who grew up an Eagles fan. He grew up in Delaware. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Martin Frank.
My dude.
He was looking around. He was pretty upset that Paul Warren wasn't talking to us.
Because this is the second week in a row, man.
But the point being, Eagles fan his whole life, gets a chance to sign with the Eagles. First day in an Eagles uniform, tears his ACL out for the year. Like that's and then they brought him back, which adds like a cool part to the story.
Yeah,
but
a lot of Eagles fans on this team.
Yeah, right. Vinny
Curry, Paul Warlow. I don't remember if Wendell Smallwood grew up in Eagles.
I'm not sure. I'm sure. I mean, he's from Delaware, so
yeah,
it would make sense.
So,
but
interesting.
Yeah. So let's flip to the offensive coordinator. Like you said, he definitely came out in like a good mood, and it's an interesting like discussion around Mike Groh because I think last year he probably got some undue criticism. Some of that was probably put on himself just based on the way he answered certain things at press conference. Like the specific one that always gets called back to is the way I forget what the exact quote was, but how it was like more. I'm blanking on what the quote was like. It was more difficult than he expected to incorporate Golden Tate into the offense. Was the gist of it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's like an interesting like way to look at what he has to go through this offseason because they have all these new pieces that he's not the only one incorporating them. Doug Peterson runs the offense like that. The criticism last year should have been directed at Doug, not Mike Groh, when there was criticism about the offense. But now Mike Rowe and Doug Peterson and the offensive staff has to incorporate DeSean Jackson, 2 new running backs. They have to get Dallas Goedert the ball more. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, I think we're going to talk about him, I'm sure, a bunch. I think he's going to get more touches than people, or at least more playing time than maybe people realize. If Matt Collins is alive, they have to, prop his body up on offense and make that happen. But so he didn't directly address those criticisms. He pretty much deflected on that stuff. But he's going to kind of be whether fair or not, he's going to be one that gets blamed if this offense isn't functioning this year.
Yeah, it's definitely not a fair criticism, I don't think.
Criticism is fair, but not the level that he will or has been getting.
Right, again, as you noted pretty thoroughly, this is Doug Peterson's offense. This is a group effort, right? You've got an assistant head coach who's also the running backs coach in Deuce Staley. There's a lot. Stoutland
runs the offensive line.
Yeah, Stoutland runs the offensive line, but he's also the run game coordinator. So
how much power does Grow really have?
Right. Yeah. If Grow's just handling red zone, did he do an awful job last year? Absolutely. But they just gave him JJ Arcega-Whiteside. They gave him 2 pounding running backs.
Great point. So if the red zone isn't working, then that's where the blame should be on him.
In turn, his role as DeFilippo's role was a while ago, or Press Taylor, whatever. So my biggest takeaway from talking to players last year is Grow is a really good teacher. And so I think sometimes we get caught up in this, the practicality of what's going on, right? There's so many factors that go into a successful play. And I think sometimes we negate thinking outside the box of how Grow may help, because we don't really know his role. He's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. He's, don't pay attention to that man behind the curtain. You wrote that
good story about him where you talked to a bunch of the guys.
It's my only good story.
I don't like complimenting you, but that was a good one.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, he's not someone who really likes to talk about himself. He deflects whenever you ask him things. So that's why it was interesting to hear from because he was more criticized than almost anybody last year.
Oh yeah.
Maybe Carson Wentz because of the injury stuff, but not because of play necessarily. So he got most of the criticism, and he's not someone who's going to talk about that much. So I did find it interesting that the thing that all the guys you talked to pointed to was that he's a good teacher.
Right.
Because that means they're interacting with, they could have easily been he's a great coach. He really motivates us.
Yeah.
They could have done the cookie cutter stuff, but most of them pointed to, he's a good teacher. And I think it's valuable because, there's been a lot of talk about Nelson Aguilar, who's been the only receiver who's been here for each of the last 5 years. Well, he's going into his 5th year. He's going to be on his 5th receivers coach. It is valuable that, 1, Grow is still around, and 2, that the guy that they replaced Gunter Brewer with has been with Grow since he was with the Bears, so he's been around. I think Nelson Aguilar said something he rode for me last year. Carson Walsh, he's really close with him, just based off, he's there because of Mike Grow. So I think that part of it's interesting. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how people react if the red zone offense doesn't come out firing on all cylinders, because that should be the best one in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, they've really kind of pimped his ride, as it were. They have... Look, JJ Arcega-Whiteside is a guy that, at the very least, can develop into a red zone weapon as a rookie. That should be the foundational piece for him in his early playing time. Jordan Howard is a touchdown hawk, whether he's the top
goal
guy,
line, short yardage, whatever. Yeah.
Right. Miles Sanders. I think Miles Sanders are having a really tough time. People that look at Miles Sanders are having a really tough time diagnosing what he is. Do you know why? It's because he's a versatile guy. He can work inside, he can work outside, he can catch, he can do a little bit of everything. And I think he's going to be also really good in red zone. Let's not forget Corey Clement. Yeah, I mean, was their red zone back as a rookie.
He's the forgotten man right now.
And I think he's going to bounce back in a big way. Wendell Smallwood had his moments in the red zone too. I think having Carson Wentz healthy, obviously, the threat of him running is a thing. But overall, I just think that this is a red zone offense that should succeed. Now, can they succeed within the 20s? They should be able to. I mean, I think DeSean Jackson's presence opens up a lot of opportunities underneath for guys like Zack and Dallas Goedert and Nelson Aguilar, Alshon Jeffrey, all these guys. So this offense is way more complete than last year's group.
All right, well, we'll stop talking about Mike Groh now. we'll go on to the on-field.
You can start listening to the podcast again.
Yeah, if you fast forwarded to this point. Well, let's get to the on-field stuff, which is what people care. There's like weird. It's not like the general Eagles fan population. There's like a weird pushback from some people. Like, it's only OTAs. Who cares? Actually, I think a lot of people care about. I mean, just based on the reaction we get to, especially Carson Wentz related content.
I mean, Boston Scott. There's a whole hive.
That's what I'm saying. Like, even this is the time of year where guys like that kind of get the publicity on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I don't know. This time of year is pretty fun to me. We only get to see them like once a week, and we're just like our first exposure to like the rookies and the newcomers. Mm-hmm. I mean, the ones that are there. So I don't know. I enjoy this time of the year. Maybe not as much as training. The beginning of training camp's awesome, especially once you like get back. It's like the first day of school kind of feeling.
Yeah.
But this is kind of like a cool like summer school type thing, you know.
If summer school could be
fun.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was a bad comparison. I don't know how else. But anyway, so. Yeah. The first thing I want to talk about, we'll get into specifically Carson Wentz, but I want to talk about DeSean Jackson to open up. So, like everybody knows the DeSean Jackson story. He left here on bad terms. Immaturity was a problem. It followed him to his other stops. I think it was fair to question whether he's actually matured to this point in his career. Mm-hmm. There's only been 2 practices. I pay a lot of attention to body language, like in general in practice, how guys interact with each other when they're on their own and they're in the locker room during games. And I think you can learn a lot about where a guy stands on a team, how popular he is. You know, it's not end all be all necessarily. Some guys keep to themselves. But just watching DeSean Jackson these first 2 practices, I know it's early and things can change real quick, especially, you know, with a guy with that kind of personality, but he seems like he's the most loved guy out there. He really like has brought an energy. Like anyone who's in his vicinity, like he has a handshake with Carson Wentz already. Nelson Aguilar, he's going to take touches away from Nelson Aguilar in reality. Like that's another guy who's going to take touches away from him. Nelson Aguilar was as happy to talk about DeSean Jackson being here as I've seen him to talk about anything. He basically was like he's giving me some swagger. Like he's making me feel like I can be myself. Like this doesn't feel like this. I think DeSean Jackson weirdly getting released, I think that maybe was the best thing for his career is my impression of it. Even though it was coming off his best season when it happened. But just watching him out there, he doesn't seem like he's lost a step. Again, I know it's OTAs. And he legit seems to be taking to like a leadership role. Like old DeSean Jackson 2 years ago probably wouldn't even be out here for voluntary OTAs.
Yeah, I think he's happy to be back where he started. Like, I think there's a general appreciation to be back, you know, be able to close out right. I'm sure he doesn't feel happy about how he closed things out here. And there's something to be said about a redemptive streak and like a redemption streak and kind of he is in a different place now. He's got kids. You know, he doesn't have to be the top guy here. He's matured. He's over 30. And I think he knows what his role is. You know what I mean? I think DeSean Jackson a few years ago was
I'm the guy.
Yeah, he was the guy. Give me the ball, whatever. Now he just wants to win. He wants to be successful. He's seen what Doug Peterson can do. I think that that's one of the big things that we
he loves Doug.
Right, but I think that's one of the things that a lot of national media doesn't really kind of take into consideration about Doug. When you see all these lists about head coaches, Doug has shown that he's willing to adapt to his players, and that he's not a system guy. Like, there's a lot of guys... Chip Kelly.
I'm sorry, did you cough there? You need some water?
Yeah, who believe in their system more than they believe in individual players.
Yes.
Doug Peterson is not that
the
guy.
Opposite.
And I think, you know, people adored Andy Reid, and I think there's a bit of Andy Reid to...
I don't know if adored is the right word around here.
Players?
Oh, players. Okay.
Yeah.
My bad. I
Sorry, I was a little too general. But... I think he's got a feel here. I think they've seen what Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman have tried to do with kind of bringing back former guys, and you know, it's a feel-good thing. And this locker room's likable. Like, really likable. So I think DeSean Jackson's in the right atmosphere for him and the right, you know, support system for him. And it seems like everybody's kind of embraced him. I wrote in my observations yesterday, every time DeSean Jackson catches a pass, somebody's like, there you go, 10, or come on, D-Jax, or there you go, DeSean. Like, people are excited to see him because he, you know, I don't want to compare him to Michael Vick, but like growing up, Michael Vick was a big, you know, Madden player for a lot of guys.
I think that's a good comparison, actually. Like, I mean, Vic wasn't here before he made his comeback here, but like the excitement of Michael Vick being on the team was still there.
Right, and DeSean Jackson was a guy that a lot of people grew up watching. He was running go routes in Madden, so you'd play with him, trade for him.
Air it out to him, yeah.
Yeah, like in the era of Madden players, DeSean Jackson was a guy who had the type of speed that you could be really successful with, and he was fun to play with in Madden, I would assume. So there's that. There's also the fact that, he's a guy that I think at 32 for wide receivers who caught over 40 passes, led the league in yards per catch, 18.9. People realize how he can help them out. Like, Zack can get a lot of underneath opportunities and yards after the catch opportunities that he didn't before because safeties were kind of bearing down. Alshon Jeffrey's another guy who's going to benefit from this. Nelson Aguilar's going to benefit. Those first few games where it was just him out there, he was throwing the ball like 600 times. Still less than Zack Ertz.
For 5 yards a catch.
Right. But it was because safeties had no reason to not.
Yeah, there was no deep threat.
Right. So, again, I think that everybody's going to benefit from his presence. He is kind of one of those larger-than-life personalities that's been in the league and kids around the league really kind of look up to. You look at JJ Arcega-Whiteside. He looked up to Alshon Jeffrey. That seems ridiculous to me because he's a guy who's under 30. Just imagine how much DeSean Jackson's pull.
If he wants to be a leader, what he says carries weight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And he's been through the ups and downs of the league. He's been a Pro Bowler.
He's been cut.
He's been traded. He's played with really bad quarterbacks. He's played with really good quarterbacks. He's experienced it all except for winning a championship. And I think having wisdom like that is really important. You talk to some of the younger guys and they talk about Brandon Graham and Vinny Curry. Halfway through Brandon Graham and Vinny Curry's career, people were looking at them as either busts or guys that were just
especially Graham.
Yeah, just rotational guys. So to see where they've come from, I mean, I just think this is a really good locker room filled with guys that have seen some in their careers. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So now just let's bring it back to Carson Wentz because it really. So I heard somebody pointed this out, and it's a very astute point. I think that Carson Wentz has never had a receiver in the NFL that can catch up to his arm strength.
You mean not Bryce Treggs?
There were some throws in that. I guess so. There were some throws even in the practice that number one, DeSean Jackson of old probably wouldn't have done the effort to go and get in the middle of defenders. But number two, I don't think Carson Wentz had receivers that could go and get them. I think it's going to bring out a certain level of confidence in Carson Wentz that he can air it out and know that DeSean will catch up to it. So he's never had. Mike Wallace was supposed to be that. Even Mike Wallace, if he was going to be at his best, was not going to be DeSean Jackson last year. He didn't look that good in the preseason and training camp. Torrey Smith was not. Torrey Smith, the threat of Torrey Smith was good because I think he drew 4 or 5 pass interferences that Super Bowl year. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a deep threat like he used to be, but just the threat of it is a bit. They did not have that last year, and it seems I know again we're overreacting to everything, but that's what we do. It's a podcast. We're reacting to OTAs. What do you want from us?
Yeah,
it seems like they already have a connection and a chemistry, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Well, I mean, game recognizes game. You know what I mean? It's real recognizes real. Sorry.
It's all right.
But anyway, yeah. Look, it is OTAs. Everybody's gonna be sunshine and rainbows right now. The nitty-gritty is when the pads come on, and you've got to see if they've got their timing down and all that stuff. But all things considered, it's a step in the right direction.
This is Donnell Pumphrey's all-star season.
He's been crushing.
This is when everybody's man, he looks shifty, and then it gets to slowly you get deeper into training camp and the preseason. He's just he just disappears, and then he's not on the roster, and then they wasted a 4th-round pick and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's
so okay. So we mentioned him a couple times. Let's talk about JJ Arcega-Whiteside. So the play we both are thinking about when we talk about just what his potential is in this offense it was Carson Wentz that threw it to him.
Yeah,
right? So he was in it was red zone 7-on-7s, I believe, and it was a jump. He threw it up to him. I believe it was a fade. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Cindy Jones covering him. Mm-hmm. He just tossed it up to JJ, and he got it without issue, and he scored a touchdown over an NFL cornerback. He looks like he has the technique down already when it comes to situations. Even if he's only playing in red zone situations, he's going to be a legit threat for them.
Yeah, he was tightly covered. So yeah, the play was a fade to the right side of the end zone. Like, Jones was on top of him. Like, this was an impressive
good coverage,
throw.
yeah.
It was pretty good coverage. Those hands, though, like, you know, like when you see somebody, like, he doesn't juggle catches, like,
no.
And normally that's a
It looked
catch.
like Alshon.
Yeah, it really did. The ball was perfect by Carson. Like, that might have been the best throw he had.
And from there, he kind of was firing on all cylinders too, Carson. Like, it kind of opened
his confidence is definitely there. Like,
I think the knee brace is like an underrated thing. He says he's not going to play with it this year. You know, it's before last season. Before the season, I talked to David Chow, he's Pro Football Doc. He has like a cool column that he like analyzes everything that he sees pretty much football wise when guys get hurt. And he was like, he's not going to have his mobility back until at least next year, is what he said last year. And I think that you're kind of seeing that be the truth. He probably we've talked plenty about how he went back too early, but yeah. Anyway, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, like with Mac Hollins again being MIA, like I don't know if he exists.
Let's talk about the wide receiver position.
Because I think Jay Jaw is pretty locked in as the number 4 receiver.
Yeah, so your top 4 are going to be Alshon Jeffrey, DeSean Jackson, Nelson Aguilar, and Jay Jaw. I guess we're going to
do that now. I just kind of started doing it.
You kind of forced it.
Is that okay?
Yeah. So behind them, you've got 8 guys.
8 guys behind them? I didn't know there was that many.
Yeah, you have Mac Hall.
They just signed Devin Ross.
Oh, no, 9 now.
Oh,
9 now. So,
Colorado alum.
Yeah, so you've got Mac Hollins, R.I.P.
Have Mac Hollins with air quotes.
Yeah, Sheldon Gibson, Braxton Miller, Devin Ross, Markin Mitchell.
Charles Johnson,
and
Carlton Agudosi.
Yeah, Carlton Agudosi.
Who had the play of the day, by the way.
Let me
Sorry.
I'm
getting excited.
And then Greg Ward, Jr. I knew I was going to get
excited. I'm getting excited.
So it needs to, here's some notes on the wide receivers. I actually think this is a better way, not a better way, but one way we can do this to kind of go through the roster. We're not going to go through every position, but I like this format. So Charles Johnson is actually running with the first team.
Yeah.
Because Alshon Jeffrey's not here. And he's looked fine. I mean, I
think he has a shot.
I do too. I think the way I look at the wide receiver position is I look at there's the 6th guy is going to be a special teams mainly guy, and the other guy is going to be like a main backup who only gets playing time if dudes are out. So like the way I'm looking at it is I look at Charles Johnson competing with Mac Hollins, competing with Sheldon Gibson, competing with Greg Ward. You know what I mean? Like in that last game. What I'm saying is Charles Johnson.
I get what you're saying.
Charles Johnson can win the job, and Sheldon Gibson and Mac Hollins can still compete for that 6th job. I don't think Charles Johnson's in the competition to be the 6th. The only way he's going to win
is if he's the 5th guy.
Is if he's the 5th guy.
I totally agree.
So when you look at the roster, though, I mean, it's really only him in that 5th guy competition outside of Mac Hollins and Gibson, right? I mean, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think any of the other guys are real threats. I will say, even Gibson, he was like running with like the 3rd and 4th strings. Like, it's not a great.
I know. Look,
they clearly just like lost faith in him over time, and I don't know what it is.
I mean, it was really telling when he was benched for Week 17 last year, and he looked.
Well, it was telling when half the receivers kept dying, and they still refused to play him. They just kept pulling guys off the street. Kamar Aiken was like on his couch. He's like, "Oh, I guess I'll sign."
The man had a catch for 48 yards and never got targeted.
That's what I'm saying. And he was I thought he looked. I mean, it was the preseason, so clearly it's a sign you don't put too much stock in the preseason. But he looked pretty good with Nate Sudfeld.
I mean, it's because they practice on the scouts.
Yeah. But it just tells you that they just don't have any faith in this dude. And just based on what we've seen so far, as of now, if Mac Hollins goes on IR or something, then Sheldon Gibson probably makes the team. But short of that, I imagine it being the scenario you put out, where it's if they keep 6 receivers, Charles Johnson 5, Mac Hollins 6.
The guy we forgot about. Is the guy who's going to win the 6th job.
Who's
and that's
that?
DeAndre Tompkins.
Oh, yeah, we didn't mention
He's going to be the one that wins this job.
Yeah, because he can be a returner and a gunner.
Outside of injury, this kid's going to win this job.
I'd put him ahead of Shelton in the pecking order right now, which says a lot about both of them, probably.
Yeah, I'm cool with, like, pounding the table. I think it's...
Pound it right now.
I don't want to wake up the baby.
That's true. There's a baby in the
other
room.
So
it was really soft pound.
If people keep asking me about this, when I look at the wide receiver group, the 6 that I keep are DeSean, Alshon, Nelson, JJ, Charles Johnson, and then DeAndre Tompkins, because I think they're going to work.
And then put Mac Hollins on the MIA list. Is that a thing?
I don't know what's going to happen there.
How many games do you have to be sit out if you're on the MIA list? Nobody knows where you physically are. Is he on the retired list? I don't know.
Wow, you're really putting this joke to work, huh? This is it's
out of control.
This is my fifth season covering the NFL. I've never seen an injury handled like this.
It's so weird.
Ever. And I used to cover the Jaguars, who came up with new reasons to be made fun of on a daily basis.
So, it's not funny, but after a podcast where I went point by point, the timeline of Mac Hollins, it
was amazing.
Well, but so the funny, I went back and looked at his Twitter timeline, and so he did a video with Lincoln Financial Group.
Yep.
And in the video, he's like, "Yeah, I suffered this injury. Now I need to make sure I'm prepared for when my career is over, because you never know." It was I was like, does he think he's never going to play again? I know I'm overthinking it, but I'm just he had all this time to do all that stuff, and he hasn't even I know we don't have to see him every day.
Hernias can be if that's what it is.
But nobody's telling us anything. He's not coming out to say anything.
Yeah, it's very...
This is the way Eagles handle injuries is shoddy anyway. But
yeah, it's weird.
This is the weirdest one we've both seen, that's for sure.
So, talking about positions, I also want to talk about that fourth running back position, because it's becoming pretty clear to us that Jordan Howard, Miles Sanders, and Corey Clement are the top three guys.
Clement, who's been out, by the way, yeah.
So you got Wendell Smallwood, Boston Scott, Josh Adams, and Donnell Pumphrey competing for maybe a fourth,
fifth, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people are giving up on Josh Adams. I just don't see it.
We're in the same boat there. I don't understand. I know.
I get the short yardage stuff, but you got two guys that can do short yardage stuff already on the roster, in Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders. I just don't understand.
Wait, so you don't understand why people are giving up on him, or you don't understand why people think he's in the race?
No, I don't understand why people are giving up on him.
Okay.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he showed something last year.
Yeah,
he's a better running back than Wendell Smallwood. Wendell Smallwood just is more understanding of the offense.
He's a better
pass catcher and stuff.
Yeah.
I get it, but I don't know. I'd keep Josh Adams. I think somebody claims him if they cut him.
Yeah, for sure. I think somebody would claim Wendell if he was...
Yeah.
He, to me, has the most trade value. So
Wendell?
Yeah, Wendell, yeah.
A team loses a guy to injury or something.
Yeah, Boston Scott's starting to build a hive. We were talking about it off air. People like Boston Scott, but everybody kind of finds that small running back intriguing. They do need a Darren Sproles replacement. He can play on special teams. He's very fast. He was brought in to be the kick returner last year during the playoff push. He's played 4 games in the system. Very smart guy. We had a conversation yesterday in the locker room, but is there any way Pumphrey makes this roster? I just don't.
No, there's not.
There could be.
He's there because they're hey,
the
we drafted you.
Play could hit the locker room. I'm still not sure Pumphrey.
They would just sign Ajayi before they bring Pumphrey.
Yeah, poor guy, but
he is a really nice kid. I've talked to him a few times. So. Last on-field observation, I think one of the more interesting things was the way they're shuffling the cornerbacks.
Yep.
Which is on purpose and probably also in part to throw us off the scent a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jim Schwartz he says that every year he's like, well, there's only the day you guys see while we're out there. There's the other practices that I'm doing other stuff. So the real lineup is in the other practices probably. But so they flip-flop. So last week, Avonte Maddox was in the nickel and Sidney Jones was on the outside. This week, it was Rasul was on the outside again, but with Avonte on the outside, which I think we both agree is his best position ideally.
Mm-hmm. His most valuable.
His most valuable. He's the best player at that position.
Yeah.
His talents or whatever. You know what I mean? And Sidney Jones is back in the nickel.
I thought he looked good. I think Sidney Jones has looked really good. Another guy that I think has looked really good that probably is competing to make another team's roster is Josh Hawkins. He had a pick
or if Darby's on PUP or something.
Right. He told me that he's got the most pass breakups during the first 4 practices of OTAs. He's got 6 pass breakups in 4 practices, and that was his first interception. Hawkins is a guy who's got some experience. They've kind of got a really good problem in the secondary. Granted, they don't have a true number 1 guy. I think Ronald Darby ideally would be a really good number 2. But everybody else is kind of an average number 2. I'm really interested to see how Crevon LeBlanc gets back on the field.
Yeah,
because
it's a tough path.
You're going to start Avonte Maddox somewhere. You have to.
Mm-hmm. Best players need to be on the field.
Yeah, they need to be on the field. Tell that to Jim Schwartz about Rasul Douglas. I think Rasul Douglas is more talented.
And on the flip side about Jalen Mills, yeah.
I think Rasul Douglas at worst is the third best cornerback.
Jalen Mills, who also his injuries kind of flown under the radar, but that one, we talked about it last week, but that's just lingered for a while.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, is...
Foot injuries can be weird.
He's also a guy who they saw get blistered in coverage. Like, there's one thing to, like, play to the system and play to the scheme and, like, you know, do what you're taught. Then there's another thing of literally getting beat on several deep passes. And I think he's better off at safety. I don't know. I mean...
Still believe that, too.
Yeah, he played safety at LSU. We should talk about, actually, the safeties really quick. With Rodney McLeod sidelined and Malcolm Jenkins skipping out on OTAs, Andrew Zendejo's been playing strong safety. Trey Sullivan's been playing free safety. They both look pretty good, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess I haven't noticed Blake Countess that much, to be honest.
He and DeAndre Hall were with the second team defense. I'm pretty sure Countess is going to be a special teams ace. He was the personal protector in punt coverage.
I saw somebody joke that, because I guess at some point Doug Peterson went up to DeAndre Hall. I think it might have been Shield from The Athletic, said something like, is that the first time they've ever interacted?
Probably. No, I mean, like...
DeAndre Hall's that guy, you're like, oh, he's still on the roster. Like, whenever we're filling out, like, our 53-man roster things, I'm like, oh, have to remember DeAndre Hall. Like, that trade just made, in retrospect, like, I mean, they only gave up a 7th or whatever, but it doesn't really make any sense.
Between him and, like, he and Danielle Pumphrey, like, there are guys on this roster where it's like, even if they have a great camp, I don't know how they make this team.
Yeah.
And, like,
they just have too many guys.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what the outlook is for him. Quarterback-wise, I will say Clayton Thorson's all over the place, but he has got an arm.
Yeah, he's got a cannon. And Sudfeld didn't look great, I would say.
Yeah, Sudfeld's...
he hasn't had a good couple... It's too early to get...
Yeah, I mean, it's 2 practices out of...
But yeah, his accuracy's been bad. All right, let's jump to the locker room to close this out. There was a decent amount of guys in there. One of the funnier quotes that I heard was from Vinny Curry. He was pretty much asked, like, what it's like to be back after, he was cut, spent a year with the Buccaneers. He's like, it just felt like a long off season. He has the coolest hair now too. I'm so distracted by it when I'm like talking to him. He has like the colored tips or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm describing that right, but on his cornrows.
Yeah.
But he, like you said, he's like one of those personalities, and he also mentioned how it didn't even feel like he left. That's why he called it a long off season, because he never stopped. He said he talked to Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham every day.
Well, and he had Bo Allen in there too.
And I forget who. I think he said Jason Peters. He said there's still a group message that never stopped going. So he was texting with these dudes as if like he was still on the team, which is funny, especially because every time a guy that leaves ends up playing the team that he was on the year before, like they all like, oh, we're not talking at all. But like the lead up to that Buccaneers game, it was all like, yeah, I'm not talking to that guy. Well, he's my friend, but they were clearly talking like every day that week.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that grew up an Eagles fan. We brought it up earlier.
Jersey guy.
So, I mean, I think he's just really happy to be home. His personality is like second to none. Like he just is excited to be there.
Awesome.
He's a really good guy. He's a guy that like when I worked at another publication covering the Eagles, we did not see very eye to eye, but he came up to me, and I came up to him and introduced myself, and whether he remembered my name or not, he was very polite and just really anxious to meet everybody. He's just a nice guy. I was talking to LJ Fort, and there's this misconception that he is just like a pass coverage linebacker, I guess, because the Steelers only really used him on third down. And he's like, no, that's not the case. Even Jim Schwartz said that he was a very well-rounded player. Yeah. So I think that's kind of interesting. He said that that the defense is looking at the linebacker position as a, hey, we'll figure this out when we see the best guys together. And I think that that's the right move. I don't think you should assure anybody. Camus has played very well in the 2 practices that we've seen. I think
he had an interception off Thorson, I want to say?
Yes.
Yeah, Thorson in the 3-on-3s or whatever it was.
Yeah, he jumped in front of a ball. So, those are guys that... There's a lot of veterans in there, and while they're not maybe the most talented guys, I think it helps having that experience. It's all, you would mention TJ Edwards in a couple articles that he looked really good. Yeah. He did. But it helps, like, it's okay to have a bunch of an undrafted guy or two in there when you have the veteran experience of Paul Warlow and Nigel Bradham.
Your guy Alex Singleton's looked pretty good, too.
That kid can blitz. I don't know what else he can do.
I batted down, I think, a Sudfeld pass at the goal line. That was pretty good.
He's
running with the first team at one point, wasn't he?
Yeah.
They don't have any linebackers there health-wise. But
right. He took first-team Sam reps with Nigel Bradham and Paul Warlow out. Also Zack Brown.
Zack Brown was there but didn't practice.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I'm trying to think of who else I talked to in the locker room.
So Nelson Aguilar I spoke to for a while, and I wrote a story about him. He's like such an I think we've talked about it. He's like such an interesting personality. We got a baby crying in the back.
I don't even know if he's crying. I think he's just talking. He's definitely my son.
He's interested in our takes.
Yeah.
But Nelson, he's obviously in a very interesting spot. He's coming off of summer where everybody rumored him to be traded, or that the Eagles were open to trading him, and we know he saw all those tweets because he was liking all of them.
Way to call him out.
No, I mean that's just
you mentioned him. He might favorite this podcast.
True. But he's entering his contract year. The Eagles have added all these weapons. He's not in a contract year. He's not going to get the amount of touches that he probably would like. DeSean Jackson just came into the mix. There was last year where they traded for Golden Tate, and his touches were cut in half. I think he went from averaging 8 targets a game to 4 afterwards. That's a pretty big drop off. But he is such a positive human. If you just talk to him, just the way he's like, so what am I going to be worried about? Am I not going to be in the NFL anymore? No, I'm going to be in the NFL. I want to be with the Eagles. This is where I am. And he's excited about DeSean Jackson being there. I just find that he has the right mindset going into his last season. And one thing he was smart to point out, and I think this will tie into his value as a free agent. What happened with Golden Tate, he thinks will be good for him in the long run because it forced him to go to all these other wide receiver positions. He said, "I'm really good at slot receiver, but I'm everywhere receiver. I prefer to play all over the field." So I think that's the right way for him to go about this last year, because I don't think his numbers are going to be what he wants them to be.
Yeah, and he's getting a pretty nice salary.
Yeah, I mean, 9.4 mil, so I'll be pretty excited still.
But I think the difference between DeSean Jackson and Golden Tate is DeSean's talents complement.
Yeah, for sure.
Nelson Aguilar. So a guy that I talked to is Sharif Miller. And a lot of people made a big deal about his number 76 uniform. So I had to ask him about it. He grew up an Eagles fan, and here's what he had to say. I play for the Eagles. I'm in the NFL. Not everybody gets this opportunity. A number is a number. I'm going to make the number. Okay.
So bad number.
So I followed up, are you going to keep the number then? I'm not sure. I've got it now, and I'm going to rock it now. But right now, that's really my focus. That's not really my focus. I'm appreciative of this opportunity, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. I don't really care about the number.
Everybody else seems to.
Yeah, everyone else does. I think it's ridiculous. We joke about it all the time, but I was talking to Dave Zangaro from NBC Sports Philly, and I was like, I just hate that number for a defensive end. I don't know why.
If he had said he's a diehard 76ers fan or something, I could have gotten it, but he didn't even go with that.
He should have gone with that.
Yeah.
That's really, he should have made that his brand.
And start saying trust the process all the time or something.
Yeah, kind of get in the spirit. But, he's a guy that is learning from... He told me this. I thought this was interesting. He goes, when I first got here with the vets, it was I'm really here. I'm seeing DeSean Jackson. I'm seeing Brandon Graham, Vinny Curry. A lot of these guys were my favorite players growing up, and now we're teammates. I think this is a guy that a lot of fans can really get behind. It's one thing to... He kind of does remind me of Vinny Curry.
I was going to say, he kind of feels like a Vinny Curry. That's if that's his ceiling, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
For a fourth-round pick, yeah.
He was very good against the run at Penn State. Vinny Curry was very good against the run at Marshall. Vinny Curry was a little bit more developed as a pass rusher coming into college, but I think Miller's a guy that sees an upside in himself. He just really needs to work on a couple of things. He told me he needs to work on his pad level. Sorry, that was my wedding ring. He's got to work on his pad level, his hands, and his get off. So he pretty much has to work on everything you need for a pass rusher. Yeah. But he's a blank canvas, and as we said with Jim Schwartz, I think that's something that he really takes a lot of pride in, is developing these defensive linemen. They have a new defensive line coach,
Philip Daniels,
and so I think this gives him a nice opening project. As my son screams in the other room, I think you have to feel good about like the content of the character
in the locker room,
in the locker room, and of these young guys. Every young guy has said the right thing. Like, nobody said anything that's like really super alarming. Even the guys that are probably not, like Josh Perkins. Josh Perkins is a great example of a guy who could ball out in the preseason and still not make this roster. They've got a good perspective. They know that this is not the only roster that they're competing to make. And I think,
they're competing. They're showing when there's tape for 31 other teams.
Right. I've been in locker rooms where guys really are dead set on making that team's roster and don't focus on improving themselves. They only focus on the competition ahead. You need to play to your best ability, and I think these guys, this is going to be a hell of a training camp. Just from a depth perspective,
there's not that many spots open.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's
maybe 5 to 6 spots that are like definitely open.
Yeah, at most 10. At most 10.
And that's on the very high end, yeah.
Right, depending on how they shuffled the roster. Yeah. But, I mean, you look at the offensive line, they have 17 offensive linemen now that they cut Johnny Gibson. Like, 13 wide receivers. Like, there's a lot of talent here, and it's not bad talent. Some of these undrafted free agents were pretty highly respected in NFL draft circles. Like, there's talent here.
Yeah. All right, I think that's a good spot to end on. Next week, they have 2 practices that we're going to get to watch, Monday and Wednesday, so we'll try and we're not going to do one podcast both days, but we'll probably get one for you guys early in the week and then later in the week. We can talk about, we didn't have time this time, but Louis Riddick said that he thinks Carson Wentz is going to win MVP this year. That's like a longer discussion that I think we should have at some point. Well, and
as Carson Wentz builds that case, I got to tell you, Zack is doing a great job at tracking all of the quarterbacks' numbers during practice. Like, he's doing a really good job with it, and I think he does it in a way that is very easy to read when you're on your lunch break or you're on your bathroom break or whatever. I don't know what you do. I'm not trying to tell you when to read, but I think you guys should check that out. I'm doing full observations of everything that's not quarterback related, so we've got a good 1-2 punch. We're kind of the Jordan Howard, Miles Sanders of...
I thought you were about to say Jordan Pippen. I was like, all right, you're giving us a little credit. No. You started with Jordan. I was like,
we're the Jordan Howard...
We're more like Luke Longley and Tony Kukoc.
Hey, I'm cool with that. I'd rather be Pat Garrity and like Horace Grant, but whatever.
All about the magic. Love it.
Yeah, so Darrell Armstrong and
Darrell Armstrong. Good
and
pull.
Tracy McGrady. I'm cool with that.
Who's McGrady here, though?
I'm lanky. I don't know. Anyway, so again, check out the great stuff that we got going. We're going to have a bunch of stuff throughout the weekend.
Carson Wentz a softball game.
Yeah, Carson Wentz a softball game on Friday. I'm hoping that he pegs.
I think he's not. I think he said he's not playing. I think he's just going to be coaching.
Oh. Now I know why now I know what stems from all these rumors about him in the locker room.
Who do you think will be the best player? I think. I feel like J-Jaw is going to be really good.
J-Jaw is going to be good. I think that... Oh, man,
I wasn't there last year, but I forget who were like the good players last year.
I think Nate Sudfeld...
Jake Elliott was really good last year, actually. He was like sneaky good, yeah.
Yeah, he's
because Elliott Shore Parks, when he was still here, we did like a draft of like the players who are going to be in the game. We were going to do like a whole point system with it. We didn't wind up following through with that because that's a lot of work to do. But I believe I had Jake Elliott on my team.
I'm going to go with Nate Gary. Nate Gary's going to be the guy. If he can actually practice. I mean, he wasn't out there.
Maybe he has a future in softball. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like guys that like I think would have. I think Avonte Maddox, if he's allowed to steal bases.
Dallas Goedert would be good.
Yeah, Goddard. I'd love to see Timmy Jernigan out there. That's who I want to see.
Yeah, power hitter.
Yeah.
Clean up. All right. We'll end on that note. Leave some comments. Tell us who you think would be the best softball player. Write a review on Apple. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out NJ.com for all of our content. And thanks for listening, guys.